In 1988, in Sacramento, California, the authorities received a report following the disappearance of a homeless man named Alvaro Montoya. Police soon discovered that the missing man had been staying at a boarding house run by a sweet elderly lady, Dorothea Puente. But the investigation that followed would uncover one of the most chilling criminal cases in the United States, involving forged Social Security checks and mysterious disappearances. One thing was clear: appearances can be deceiving. And what if the answer was buried deep in Mrs. Puente's backyard? It's November 11th, 1988. At 10 a.m., the Sacramento Police Department receives a call. On the line is a volunteer from the St. Paul Senior Center charity. "It's been several days since I've heard from one of our former residents, Alvaro Montoya. He suffers from schizophrenia and memory loss. I personally took him, a month ago, to a boarding house run by Mrs. Dorothea Montalvo Puente, a kind woman in her 60s who works with us." The volunteer adds a disturbing detail. A social worker, Judy Moe, had actually warned her that Mrs. Montalvo Puente was a strange woman, that she had already served time in prison and carried a rather shady criminal past. But is that enough to accuse her of anything? "I know Mrs. Puente very well," she continues. "She's such a caring and kind woman. She looks after our residents so well. She even cooks them homemade meals and helps bathe them." When the police arrive at the given address, 1426 F Street, they find the very picture of a sweet grandma welcoming them with apple pie and coffee. Dorothea Puente is 60 years old. She's petite, thin, impeccably groomed and dressed. Her hair is permed and gray. She wears small reading glasses and a neat apron. Smiling, she extends a hand to the officers. She explains she was in the middle of preparing a special low-sodium meal for the first group of residents. "Would you like some coffee?" "No, thank you. If you don't mind, Mrs. Puente, I have a few questions for you." "But of course." Officer John Cabrera gets straight to the point and questions her about the disappearance of Alvaro Montoya. She replies, visibly moved. "His nephew came to pick him up 3 days ago. You know, I take care of them with all my heart. But if family shows up to claim them, there's nothing I can do." John Cabrera raises an eyebrow. "But if I'm not mistaken, departures like this go through the St. Paul Senior Center, don't they?" "Not at all. I've been given full authorization to handle all the administrative paperwork myself. St. Paul only sends me the people who require special care. Over there, they don't have the proper equipment. I've seen it for myself many times. They mix seniors with addicts, stack them on top of each other, and of course, it always ends badly. I really lighten their workload. Oh, but I do it out of Christian charity, believe me." She pauses, meets the officer's eyes. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, she gives herself a small slap on the forehead. "Oh dear, please excuse me. I completely forgot to turn off the oven. I'll be right back. There are chairs. Please make yourselves comfortable while you wait." At that moment, the police have no idea what awaits them. The story of this woman, who looks like the perfect American grandma, actually began 85 years ago, far from Sacramento. Dorothea Helen Gray was born on January 9th, 1929, in Redlands in San Bernardino County, California. Her childhood was marked by an unstable and impoverished home where she was unloved. She had 7 other siblings. Her father, Jesse James Gray, was an alcoholic suffering from tuberculosis. He died when Dorothea was only 8 years old. Her mother, Trudy Mae Yates, was an unstable, violent, and negligent woman who sank into alcoholism shortly after her husband's death. The 8 children, left to fend for themselves, had to find their own way to eat and survive. 2 years later, their mother also died in a car accident while driving drunk. Now orphans, the Gray children were separated and sent to various orphanages across California. Dorothea and 2 of her brothers ended up at Santa Maria de los Nieves, an orphanage about an hour from San Francisco. The place was run by nuns, and it was far from welcoming. Living conditions were harsh, and the historical context didn't help. The 1930s and 1940s, America was deeply marked by the Great Depression and World War II. Many people were dying of hunger. In that environment, Dorothea quickly learned to lie and manipulate in order to survive. Throughout her stay at the orphanage, she never managed to form secure or lasting bonds with her caretakers. This would significantly shape her personality later in life. As a teenager, she developed a strong tendency toward deception and fake identities, creating imaginary stories to gain sympathy and control those around her. Then one day, she ran away and got married at just 16 years old to Fred McFall, a World War II soldier. But the marriage turned out to be a disaster, marked by constant instability. Two children were born from that union, but Dorothea abandoned them early on, then disappeared to start over under different names. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, Dorothea became involved in multiple cases of check forgery, scams, and fraud. She served several prison sentences for her crimes. Despite repeated warnings, she couldn't stop herself from reoffending. Her love for easy money was too strong. In any case, morals were never something she had, and never would. Meanwhile, she cycled through relationships and brief marriages, each one ending in conflict, abuse, abandonment, or arrest. She never had more children beside the daughter and son from her first marriage. In total, Dorothea would marry 4 times. In her relentless pursuit of more money, she eventually became involved in the world of prostitution and pimping. With the money she earned, she bought clothes, shoes, and food, just basic, immediate needs. She lived a marginal and chaotic life, where violence and abuse were normalized, just part of the everyday. Her experiences with men were all marked by physical and verbal abuse, and that's all she would come to expect from the opposite sex. After working as a prostitute for some time, Dorothea discovered the role of a caretaker, a job that required few qualifications. That suited her perfectly. She had none, like many children born during the Great Depression. This new profession opened the doors to an entirely different world. 4 years later, Dorothea rented an apartment at 1426 F Street in downtown Sacramento. The place was charming, a beautiful Victorian home built in 1895, surrounded by an English-style garden. Mrs. Puente took it upon herself to play the role of caretaker for the other tenants. It was during this time that she met Ruth Monroe, a 61-year-old woman. They were introduced through a mutual friend. A fast friendship bloomed between them. Unlike Dorothea, Ruth Monroe was a widow and mother of 5 children, whom she had mostly raised alone. She had received an education, studied, and worked as a factory operator. Despite their differences, the two women seemed to get along well. It was the meeting of two lonely souls. Without husbands and no children to care for anymore, they lived lives free from responsibility. Then one day, Dorothea said to Ruth, "You know, I've always dreamed of opening a diner, a little restaurant. I would love for you to work with me." Ruth Monroe wasn't working anymore, but she had saved up a little money. "If it helps you out," she replied, "I've got a bit set aside." Eventually, the cafe opened. Everything seemed to be going well. But then, an event came to shatter that little moment of happiness. Harold was diagnosed with cancer. As a result, he was frequently hospitalized. Ruth, devastated, doesn't want to live alone. Fortunately, her friend is there for her. Even better, she has an idea. "Why don't you come live with me?" Yes, why not, after all? On Easter Sunday, 1982, Ruth moves into the beautiful Victorian home. Her son, Bill Holden, visits her daily. As the days go by, he begins to notice a troubling change. His mother, always mentally strong and loving, starts speaking incoherently. She seems distant, forgetful, unable to hold a conversation. These signs worry Bill. Still, he thinks it's all due to the stress of his stepfather's illness. One day during a visit, Bill finds her lying on the couch, looking a little tipsy, a drink in her hand. Ruth doesn't drink. She hates alcohol and constantly lectures her children about it. "Mom, what's wrong? Are you drunk?" "No, of course not. It's just a little mix Dorothea makes me, to help me relax, that's all." Bill doesn't push the issue. After all, they're friends. But his mother's condition worsens rapidly over the next few days. When he comes back again, he finds her in an even more alarming state. She's in pajamas, her hair disheveled, barely responsive. Deeply concerned, Bill takes her hand. "Are you okay, Mom? Is Dorothea taking good care of you?" But Ruth doesn't respond. He notices she's crying. The next day, one of his brothers calls him with the news they had feared the most. Their mother died during the night. When Bill rushes to 1426 F Street, he learns that her body has already been taken by the funeral services. Dorothea, dressed in black and seemingly devastated, throws her arms around the young man and tells him his mother had taken her own life with pills. Bill Holden is completely crushed. At the same time, Bill couldn't believe his mother would have taken her own life. She was far too devoted to her children and her sick husband to ever cause them such pain. And recently, she had just become a grandmother. No investigation was ever opened. In August 1982, Dorothea once again drew the attention of the authorities when she was caught red-handed forging a signature on a Social Security check belonging to one of her tenants. She was just about to cash it when she got caught. She was brought to court and sentenced to 4 years in prison. In 1985, she managed to obtain parole and returned to her home in Sacramento. She resumed her role as a caretaker, as if nothing had happened. And she also returned to the very same activities that had landed her in jail: check fraud and embezzlement. Brazen as ever, she continued acting like the landlady of a house that didn't even belong to her. Her tenants were vulnerable, often elderly or too timid to stand up to her. What emboldened her most was knowing that these people were invisible to society. Nobody cared about them, and if something were to happen to them, no one would come looking. Still, she played her role to perfection, the generous and devoted old lady helping the less fortunate. Her neat appearance and motherly behavior won the trust of both the authorities and her boarders. She was short, about 5'1", with a solid build and a round, time-worn face. Her hair was short and curled, dyed either blonde or gray, depending on the period. She often wore glasses and modest clothes, reinforcing her image as a harmless grandmother. But behind this facade of kindness hid a manipulative and dangerous personality. For 3 consecutive years, she carried on her illegal activity in absolute secrecy. Meanwhile, tenants continued to come and go. Homeless individuals, elderly people living in poverty, and those suffering from mental illness. To each of them, Dorothea played the role of a compassionate benefactor, offering shelter and food to those society had cast aside. But soon, several boarders began to mysteriously disappear. To the social workers who visited regularly, she would say that so-and-so had run away, that someone else had been picked up by her daughter, or that another woman had gone back to prostitution and couldn't be convinced to stay. She faked concern and managed to fool the caseworkers and volunteers from St. Paul Senior Center, which sent her most of the tenants. What no one knew was that behind this kind facade, Dorothea was orchestrating a diabolical plan. She targeted the most isolated residents and began by stealing their ID documents and social benefits. Once she had full control of her victims' finances, she would gradually sedate them with increasing doses of tranquilizers or antidepressants. Some died in their sleep. Others succumbed slowly to poisoning. To cover her tracks, she buried their bodies in the yard, sometimes wrapped in plastic, sometimes covered in lime to slow decomposition. For years, she continued to collect the Social Security payments of her deceased victims, forging letters to create the illusion that they were still alive. Her ability to manipulate tenants, neighbors, and even social workers allowed her to carry out her crimes with complete impunity. The case finally began to unravel in 1988, when a volunteer from the St. Paul Senior Center grew worried about the sudden disappearance of one of her clients. Alvaro Montoya, a 51-year-old man who suffered from schizophrenia. The last known address he had was 1426 F Street. She contacted the police after finding inconsistencies in Dorothea's explanation of Bert Montoya's departure. Detective John Cabrera from Sacramento's Criminal Investigation Division, along with his colleague Terry Brown and Dorothea's parole officer Jim Wilson, were dispatched to question the caretaker looking after the missing man. Before leaving, Cabrera was approached by a social worker, Judy Moe. She knew Mrs. Puente well, as she was in charge of writing reports on the boarders living under her care. "Don't forget to bring shovels," she suggested to the officer. "Shovels? What for?" he asked. "The last time I visited that place," said Moe, "I noticed freshly turned soil in the yard. It looked more like a cemetery than anything else. When I told the volunteer at St. Paul, she didn't believe me." So armed with shovels, Cabrera, his colleague, and the parole officer made their way to Dorothea's house. At first glance, the old blonde-wood house seemed like an idyllic place for the sick, the poor, and the lonely. Dorothea Puente opened the door to the officers. The first thing John Cabrera noticed was her carefully groomed appearance. She had just had her hair colored and styled. "I've been expecting you, gentlemen," she said cheerfully. That sentence threw the officer off. "We're here about Bert Montoya." "Of course, no problem at all. Come in," she replied with the same confidence. Dorothea cooperated with the authorities, leading them through her home with unsettling calm. Cabrera's first task was to learn more about this mysterious place. "This house you run, what exactly is it? A boarding home? A shelter for the homeless? A retirement house?" The old woman glanced at the officer, then at her parole officer. She said, "Listen, Jim, I haven't followed the rules." Indeed, since her release from prison, she was not allowed to operate any kind of care facility. But she had broken the law again. Still, someone had to look after these poor souls. Shelters were underfunded, overcrowded, with no space left to place anyone. And the elderly often needed special care and attention. With the same manipulative skills she had always used to get out of trouble, she tried to divert the investigators' attention. She had spent years perfecting this character. The respectable old lady. Whenever she faced social workers or strangers, she made sure to appear serene and composed. She even made herself look 10 or 15 years older, using makeup, hairdos, and the right clothes. A sweet, innocent granny. Harmless. The complete opposite of what she truly was. While Jim Wilson and the other officer continued speaking with her in the kitchen, Cabrera began inspecting the rest of the house. He walked through all the rooms but found nothing suspicious. Everything seemed clean, tidy, spotless, matching the image Dorothea projected. Yet one detail caught his attention. A section of the garden soil appeared recently disturbed. That's when Judy Moe's words came back to him. When he returned to the kitchen, Cabrera told the woman, "Well, I've looked through the house and found nothing. I'll be able to report to the social worker that everything seems fine and there's nothing suspicious." Mrs. Puente looked pleased, clearly relieved by the outcome. But then Cabrera added, catching her off guard, "One last thing. Would it be all right if I dug a bit in your yard?" Without flinching, she replied slowly, "Here's what we'll do. You go back to your offices. I'm sure you have more important things to do than staying here. Meanwhile, I'll contact people who can take care of that task for you. Then you can come back to check." But the officer, now certain of the kind of person he was dealing with, didn't fall for it. "Look, we're already here. We've got shovels. We might as well do it now. And if we mess anything up, we'll fix it." The falsely kind expression she had been wearing vanished instantly, but she gave in and allowed them to dig. The three men only had 2 shovels with them, so John Cabrera had to borrow one from Dorothea. The operation began. They dug without pause. After reaching about 1 meter deep, John suddenly stopped. His shovel had just struck something he thought was a tree root. Curious, he continued with his bare hands, tugging at the so-called root, but it wouldn't budge. He persisted and eventually managed to pull it free. That's when he realized he wasn't holding a root. He was holding a human femur. As the officers climbed out of the hole, they were certain Something dark had happened in this house. There might be more human remains buried beneath the soil. At the station, John confronted the seemingly calm landlady, who occasionally dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. He asked her questions about what they had just found. Trying to gauge her reaction, he said, "I bet if I keep digging, I'll find more bodies." Mrs. Puente shot him a sharp, intelligent look and replied with a hint of mischief, "If you do, I didn't put them there." But the news of human remains being discovered at 1426 F Street spread quickly. The next morning, Saturday, November 12th, 1988, reporters were already camped outside the house. Laura Santos, the medical examiner, arrived with her team to continue the excavation. From the start, their work was disrupted by the presence of journalists from across the country and even abroad. To make matters worse, a large crowd had gathered in the street. "Oh, all of this is making me very nervous. If it helps to reassure you, no, you are not under arrest," Mrs. Puente Dorothea, visibly relieved by this statement, adds in a sweet tone, "My head hurts, all this commotion. I think I'll go to the hotel down the street, have a coffee." John doesn't object. He's wrong to let her go. "Then take your things. I'll accompany you." She nods. When she returns from her room, she's wearing a red coat, a matching umbrella, and carrying her handbag. Escorted by the officer, she steps out of the house. One of the photographers captures and immortalizes the moment. Dorothea in her red coat, face half hidden behind her matching umbrella, holding John Cabrera's hand as she weaves through the reporters. No one knows at that moment that Dorothea Puente will never set foot again at 1426 F Street. Knowing the police will catch her sooner or later, she decides to flee. John Cabrera watches her walk down the street and enter the hotel. Without realizing it, he is watching her disappear. He returns to his work, not worrying too much about her. The search continues. A second piece of evidence is uncovered. This time, a leg. But that's not all. Upstairs, Officer Terry Brown makes another shocking discovery. It's a carpet. The smell coming from it is nauseating. He recognizes the odor well, the stench of decay. Apparently, bodily fluids had soaked into the wooden floor beneath the carpet. There's no doubt corpses must have stayed in that room. "We need to get Mrs. Puente right now." When the police go to fetch her at the hotel, the receptionist tells them she's no longer there. But how? She's gone. "Oh, but she was here just a moment ago. I saw her come in, greeted her politely, then she went across the lobby to the phone, called a taxi company, waited a little while, and then a taxi came and took her away." The officers realize they've been outsmarted. The hotel was just a ruse to lure them away and allow her to escape the house. They have no idea where she is. A race against time begins. By now, Dorothea has already left Sacramento and fled to Los Angeles. Her run has just begun. The police search for her relentlessly. Checkpoints are set up at city entrances and exits, and her description is sent to all police forces in California. But she's impossible to find. It's as if she has vanished into thin air. John Cabrera realizes he made a serious mistake taking her to the hotel that day. How could he have been so easily fooled? He moves heaven and earth to locate her, but it quickly becomes clear that all efforts so far have been in vain. That's when he decides to contact the FBI for additional resources. She must be found as soon as possible. Meanwhile, at the search site, one of the many onlookers in the street gives an important piece of information to the medical examiner, Laura Santos. "I have to confess, I've dug holes in this garden before, at Mrs. Puente's request. She paid me cash to do the work. She told me it was for burying trash. I never asked questions. I just did my job and got paid, that's all." The man steps forward and shows the exact spot where he dug. Over the next 3 days, 7 more bodies in advanced stages of decomposition are uncovered beneath the garden. Each time the shovels strike something, a bone, an arm, a leg. It doesn't stop. A true massacre. In Los Angeles, Puente finds a small hotel room. She takes on a new identity and tries to seduce a man in a bar, spinning a fictional story. But her face is now nationally known, broadcast on media and newspapers. The bar patron eventually recognizes her from the evening news and alerts the police immediately. He also provides the address of the hotel where she's staying. On Thursday, November 17th, Dorothea Puente's flight ends. She is finally arrested. John Cabrera lands at John Wayne Airport in Santa Ana to pick her up. The Los Angeles police are already waiting on the tarmac. As he steps off the plane, he sees her, in her red coat, hands cuffed, flanked by two officers. He approaches and asks if she's all right. She answers yes. Then suddenly she turns to him and says, in the tone of a little girl caught doing something wrong, "Mr. Cabrera, I'm sorry." John has many questions for Dorothea about the 7 bodies unearthed at the residence. Yet nothing proves they were murdered, and the 60-year-old fugitive does not plan to confess. Back in Sacramento, she's taken to the police station. The officer asks if she has any confessions to make. She answers no, she has nothing to say. She's innocent. It's her last face-to-face with John Cabrera. That very night, she is placed in county jail on remand. Dorothea Puente's trial begins in 1992 and becomes one of the most publicized of the era. The prosecution portrays her as a methodical killer, exploiting the vulnerability of her tenants to murder them coldly and take their money. The defense argues that she never killed anyone and that the deaths were natural, claiming her only fault was continuing to cash her tenants' checks after they had died. However, forensic evidence is overwhelming. Victims were heavily drugged, sometimes over several days, before being executed. Bodies were then kept between 2 and 4 weeks in one of the upstairs rooms before being buried under cover of night, explaining the smell of decomposition in the floors. No one in the neighborhood ever suspected a thing. Dorothea Puente was charged with 9 murders, though she was convicted of only 3. Here is the list of presumed victims found buried in her garden. Her former friend and associate Ruth Monroe, 61, Everson Gilmouth, 77, Alvaro Bert Montoya, 51, Leona Carpenter, 78, Dorothy Miller, 64, Benjamin Fink, 55, James Gallup, 62, Vera Faye Martin, 64, and Betty Palmer, 78. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Throughout her incarceration, she maintained her innocence, denying all involvement and portraying herself as a misunderstood woman, victim of a biased justice system. She died on March 28, 2011, of natural causes at the age of 82. Dorothea Puente remains one of the most terrifying criminals in American legal history, joining the ranks of female serial killers.